Look, thanks for the opportunity and thanks for the organisers for the great timing of this event. To be just over 2 weeks after we announced the first auction results from the Emission Reduction Fund. It's a lot more fun being up here talking to you about an actual result rather than speculating about what it might be. So unashamedly, my short presentation here is to ask you to consider participating. There are some great and wider-ranging opportunities than the Carbon Farming Initiative, and I'll briefly cover those. And if my quick overview whets your appetite to think about participating, I've brought 3 of my best technical experts along across the wide range of methods available, and we have a room across the corridor from 11 o'clock, and we're happy to dive into the detail to help you with any further information about how to participate. So I'm just going to quickly cover a little bit about what we do, what is the Emission Reduction Fund, how does it work, what are the opportunities, and then I'll conclude. So the Clean Energy Regulator, we have, as Val kind of outlined, we've had a fair bit of change, building for carbon tax, dismantling carbon tax, then building for the Emission Reduction Fund. So in that policy churn, our simple purpose statement is accelerating carbon abatement for Australia. That's our focus, and you'll find that if you want to come and do business with us, if you're going to help us accelerate carbon abatement, then we'll make it easy for you to do business with us. So we look after the Carbon Farming Initiative, now the Emission Reduction Fund. The Emission Reduction Fund was built on the architecture of the Carbon Farming Initiative, the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Scheme, and the renewable energy targets. So they're the schemes. We're an independent Commonwealth regulator, so those of us employed there are public servants, but we're not under the direction of the Minister. We are part of the Environment Portfolio. So what is the Emission Reduction Fund? It's a $2.55 billion fund. And yesterday, Minister Hunt spoke at the Emission Reduction Summit, the Carbon Farming Initiative Summit at the MCG, and said that he'll not be seeking further money in the budget. I'll talk about some of the headline results from the first auction, but some of you may be aware that we have contracted around about a quarter of that $2.55 billion after the first auction. So if you are thinking about participating, don't hang in there. You know, you've now got some price disclosure, which we'll talk about from the first auction. So if you're thinking about it, move ahead quickly would be my suggestion. It is about anything that reduces greenhouse gas emissions or that sequesters carbon, and there's a wide range of methods that are currently under development, and I'll talk a little bit about those later. So the headline results from the auction, we contracted 47 million tonnes of abatement at a total cost of $660 million. The Emission Reduction Fund does enable a couple of types of aggregation, which I'll touch on a little bit later. But you'll see there that there was 144 projects, but the actual number of contractors was 43. So you can see there was quite a lot of aggregation happening, and 107 actual contracts awarded. The range in individual contracts ranged between 12,000 tonnes over the contract period to the largest single contract was 3.5 million tonnes. The contract times ranged between 3 and 10 years, but most were around the 7 years. You can only get 10 years if you're a very large project that has a 10-year crediting period, or if it's a sequestration project, that a method that has a 10-year crediting period. So the results were certainly well beyond anyone's expectations. Certainly the Minister had indicated he wasn't expecting and sees this as a fantastic result. But again, the take-home message out of that is we have contracted more than was expected, so don't hang back if you're thinking about participating. So how does the scheme work? I'll just cover at a very high level the 4 key stages. Firstly, you apply to us to have a project registered. There must be a method. The Department of Environment handles the preparation of the methods. So you lodge an application for registration of your project. So steps 1 and 3 are kind of the statutory steps. It's a voluntary scheme, so we're sort of saying come and be regulated in steps 1 and 3. 2 and 4 are the purchasing elements, and they're optional for you. So assuming that, and obviously post-carbon tax, there is currently no real market other than us buying the emissions. There's every chance that a secondary market will form as it did under carbon tax at some stage. So the next step is you have a registered project and you want to come and participate in the auction. So you actually have to get auction qualified, because it's one thing to get a statutory registration, and there is a fit and proper person test as part of entry into the scheme, the statutory part. But the auction qualification is we actually make a commercial decision on whether we actually want to do business with you. So if you might have something that looks like it's going to meet the method, but it's just not commercially proven, there's no indication you've got any prospects of getting finance, so we may not actually auction qualify you. So there's an auction qualification step to get into the auction. 5 days out from the auction deadline, you actually, and the contract terms are essentially non-negotiable. You can, as part of the auction qualification process, if you want to have some conditions precedent, we will accept some conditions precedent. Apart from that, the contract conditions are pretty standard. You actually then offer your volume to us 5 days out in your delivery schedule, and then the final thing in the auction window is you bid a price, and it's a single price for the contract length that you choose, and it's a firm delivery contract. In the reporting and auditing, this is one of the big changes from those of you who are aware of carbon farming. In the Carbon Farming Initiative, every time you made a claim for Australian carbon credit units or ACCUs, you had to provide an audit report. Now, depending on the scale of your project, there's a fixed number of audits, but it's a lot less, and contract aggregation enables you to drive down your fixed costs per Australian carbon credit unit that you get. So there's some really simplification there. Then finally is the delivery. In step 3, you get your carbon credit units once you report to us and prove you've delivered the abatement. In step 4, you deliver the Australian carbon credit units to us according to the delivery schedule you've put down, and then we pay you. And here's where I'd just like to pause and talk about one of the key things you ought to consider in the scheme. You may have heard, for example, the renewable energy target. There's a lot of uncertainty with a lot of reviews. The government can change, Parliament can change the legislation at any time. That creates a lot of uncertainty for those who are in that scheme. These contracts are essentially very solid Commonwealth commercial contracts. They cannot be changed by a change of law. So if you get a 7-year contract with the Clean Energy Regulator, you're absolutely guaranteed of being paid, which is good. So some of the opportunities are quite similar. So for those of you who are in the waste industry, and I know there's a lot of people from local government here, the opportunities in terms of landfill gas, advanced waste technology, wastewater, those opportunities are still there. The main change is that these, in terms of landfill gas and AWT, are basically only applied to legacy waste. Non-legacy waste post-carbon tax is now able to be incentivised under the Emission Reduction Fund. So just one quick case study, CEDA facility up in Cairns, which I'm sure many of you have been to and seen. About 125,000 tonnes of mixed waste per annum comes into it. They, in fact, have delivered quite a few Australian carbon credit units, 36,500 under CFI, but they've been awarded a contract for 119,412 tonnes in the recent Emission Reduction Fund auction. And I should have mentioned before, in terms of those numbers for the first auction, it was over 18 million tonnes of abatement offered by the waste, that we contracted in that first auction. Out of the 47 million came from the waste industry. So there's now a range of other opportunities, and this is again one of the major changes from compared to the Carbon Farming Initiative. A few examples there on the screen: commercial buildings and public lighting. I think there's a bit of interest emerging in local government about the public lighting. Industrial electricity and fuel efficiency and transport. And local government, the waste industry run big transport fleets. A lot in the waste industry run quite large facilities as well. There's a range of new methods coming out all the time, and in this short slot I won't try to cover all of those, but think extremely broadly, and as I say, with a few colleagues we're happy to dive into more detail in terms of the opportunities. But there are much wider opportunities. So when it comes to the second auction, we did get one transport project registered and approved and to get into the first auction, and did get a contract. So we were always expecting to be very heavily dominated the first auction by old carbon farming initiative projects. But as we come into the second auction, we are bound to see a lot of energy efficiency, which a lot of that does have a lower, a very short payback anyway. So we may see a totally different mix of projects in this next auction. So to conclude, the Emission Reduction Fund is the centrepiece of the government's direct action policy. The first part of that is the purchasing through a reverse auction of abatement. The second part that some of you may have heard talked about is called the safeguard mechanism. That's under development. The core legislation is there. That will apply to probably about 140 of the largest emitters in Australia, which comprise, I think, about 53% of total emissions. So that will cover them from, it's proposed to start from the 1st of July 2016. The rules for that, there's some consultation being done by the Department of Environment at the moment, and that's intended to safeguard so that the purchasing of abatement is not offset by business as usual emissions going up elsewhere. It is a $2.55 billion fund, and I'll let you into a bit of a secret, but the Commonwealth's finance is not too flash. Have you heard about that at all? Yeah. So you can make your own punt about whether or not you think that will be topped up. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of discussion about what Australia's post-2020 targets will be, and the government will announce those in July, and then the discussion will happen about, well, how will Australia achieve those? But at this stage, the only certainty you have is that $2.55 billion. The Minister Hunt said the other day at the MCG that that is absolutely guaranteed. That will not be touched in the budget process. But it won't last forever, which is why I'm saying, if you're thinking about it, hop in. A wide range of options and a lot of flexibility. I didn't really talk about that before, but at the project level, across the one method, you can aggregate. You can broadly register a broad project, and you can add sites in later as you go. That defrays your costs of participation quite significantly. There's also contract aggregation. If you have a number of registered projects, you can choose to bid those in individually into the auction, or you can in fact bid it in collectively and bundle it up as one bid. And also, I should have mentioned before, the actual contract is a pay-as-bid auction. So while the price was up there on the board before, the average price of $13.95, that is an average price, and those who got contracts at the price that they bid. But in case anyone wants to ask me, I can tell you now, I'm not going to tell you what the range is. Our job is to buy the most abatement we can at the lowest possible cost and to make sure there is competition. It will not be, again, to preempt potentially a question, we haven't set a date for the second auction as yet. I can say it's unlikely to be very long away, but we want to see that there will be again competition, so we'll be watching the registered projects, we'll be looking at those who missed out on a contract in the first auction and whether or not they may come along, but we won't run that call that second auction until we know that there will be competition. So if you are thinking about participating, the first step is to get your project registered, because if you wait for us to call on an auction and try to get your project registered, get your commercial modelling done to decide what price you're going to bid, you'll run out of runway. So the first step is to do that, and my colleagues and I would love to talk to anyone who's interested across in the room, across the Sandpiper room at 11 o'clock. Thank you.